And so having set the context for first panel discussion, I want to introduce our moderator for this first panel. As I would have shared, her profile is in the agenda that would have been sent to you. And so I'm going to follow through as I did this morning in introducing Charlotte and share some personal thoughts on Camille Facey. So Camille is from Jamaica. She has been a director here at CCGI for just about 3 years now, or coming on to her third year. But you will not think so when you sit in the boardroom with her. Camille brings such a passion for governance because her role with the private sector organization of Jamaica, has and being on several boards in Jamaica has positioned her to understand the importance of corporate governance and the influence it has on the lives of many people. And that has really created a level of passion that I have seen, unmatched in the boardroom. I have a lot of expectations for Camille's contribution for us here at CCGI. And she is, as you would see from today's panel discussion, she's so astute and able to get to the very depth of what exactly governance is and what it means for us and what do we need to do next. And so I think as we look at this panel that's going to look at ESG, the climate agenda, and sustainability, as we look at impact of these things in the Caribbean region in particular, there is no better moderator for this panel. So Camille, I am so happy that you agreed to do this for us this morning. And I now hand over to you to introduce your panelists and to begin this morning's first panel.
Oh, thank you, Camilla. And you have to be astute enough to know when people are saying nice things about you because they laid hands on you the night before to tell you that you're moderating the panel. Now, that having been acknowledged, thank you, Camilla. I am delighted to be here. Our panel this morning is ESG, Sustainability, and the Climate Agenda. And our first panel and our keynote, they were just all amazing. Our chairman said that we are small states with strong democracies. How do we continue to ensure that that statement stays true? And then we had Professor Garrett making the point that where the rate of learning, that the rate of learning needs to be greater than the rate of change. Prof. Garrett has to show me and teach me how it is to be like him, where everything that I say is quotable. Everything Prof. Garrett says is quotable. And so this morning now, we are going to be talking about sustainability and the climate agenda and ESG. And I don't know if I appreciated Dexter's last comment in the chat, reminding us that Welsh said, if the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, then the end is near. I didn't particularly want to be starting my panel with the end is near. And then we had Dr. Charlene Sharp piping in to agree with him. So there is so much to discuss, and there is nobody better to kick us off than Dr. Waddah Al-Hashmi. And Dr. Waddah Al-Hashmi is the chairman of the Board of Directors Institute, GCC, the UAE Chapter Advisory Committee. You have his bio, but just to go through some of it, he's the Senior Director, Logistics and Marine Assurance of Emirates National Oil Company Limited. And he is considered one of the international authorities on environment, sustainability, health and safety, as well as governance, leadership in the leadership and high reliability organizations. He is the chairman of the Energy Institute of the Middle East and is also the chairman of the Platform for Connected Leadership in Dubai and the UAE. He's currently appointed as the Senior Director for Logistics and Marine Assurance and has served in the very recent past as Senior Director for Sustainability, Operational and Business Excellence for the Enoch Group in Dubai. And one of the things that CCGI has been so amazing at doing is finding these knowledgeable and wonderful speakers and bringing them here to us in the Caribbean and indeed throughout the world. Dr. Waddah, we look forward to everything you have to share with us this morning.
All right. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone from around the world. I hope my internet stays stable. I've tried to convince my kids to stay off the internet whilst I do this afternoon. So, firstly, I'd like to thank obviously the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute, Ms. Camille, for inviting us once again to this wonderful event. I caught most of the first session, and yeah, it's really a pleasure to be here and maybe share some thoughts around things. There was a question that was I remember posed to me, but then we had a few internet difficulties. And I did not respond. And I think that I owe it to Kamala before I start talking about sustainability, ESG, and my view on the role of boards, etc. To really talk about the UAE is relatively a small state. The leadership could be described as a benevolent leadership kind of state. I think the leadership here in the UAE actually does believe in developing its people. We're not a big population. I mean, the whole population of the UAE is around about 9 million, of which only 1 million is indigenous or UAE nationals. Some interesting statistics actually around about 50% of the population are between the age of 20 and 40, and about just under 85% is under the age of 40. So so that is quite an interesting statistic. So you need to be able to manage young people. I have young kids, 16 and 9, and the twins and triplets. So I can tell you it's always a challenge to try to manage young people. But I think what is interesting about this part of the world, which I think maybe is a little bit different in other places, is that this part of the world bases a lot of its governance on sort of the tribal dynamics. And in tribal dynamics, we have been practicing in this part of the world what is called servant leadership, or what is known or coined as servant leadership now in the schools of sort of leadership and management. And servant leadership actually comes from the principle that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, once said. He said that in the journey, the leader, the leader of a people is their servant. So the whole idea is that you serve the people, and then you earn the right to basically kind of lead them. It's a bit of a that's the understanding. And there was a lot of, we're very, very fortunate, obviously, because there's a lot of wealth in this part of the world, and in this country in particular, there's wealth mainly from obviously oil and gas reserves and so on and so forth. And so the government did decide to invest the wealth into development, into developing infrastructure. We have some of the best infrastructure in the world in terms of roads, in terms of transport, in terms of internet. Notwithstanding my weak internet here at home, please don't blame the UAE for that. That's I think my internet bandwidth here at home is a bit challenged. But really, some of the fastest internet. We've applied 5G. There's so many things. We have one of the busiest, if not the busiest, airport in the world. We have amazing things. I mean, the Dubai airport in itself has more than about 105 or 110 million passengers which go through it a year. And so the UAE's leadership always aspired to get people involved in some of the most significant kind of programs. So you can see that the UAE is entering, for example, the space program. They're doing a lot of stuff on food security, energy security, and so on and so forth. And I think they are capitalizing on having a young population and trying to get them very much involved. There is a lot of opportunities. Obviously, we have a population of 9 million, only 1 million are UAE nationals. And therefore, there's a lot of people who are in the UAE who are helping grow this nation. And that is why the government has been very forthcoming with its. I think it's referred to as tolerance. I don't think it's more about tolerance. I think it's more about embracing other cultures and other people and other thinking, and based on some basic principles of mutual respect between people. That this country is, alhamdulillah, and let's hope it stays that way, one of the safest places in the world to live in. As Nigel mentioned earlier, that democracy and corporate governance. I think that it's not really about maybe smaller or larger countries or states. I think governance is something which should drive growth, and this whole question of fairness, I think, is very important. I think the principle of fairness, the principle of equity, the principle of people's rights and things like that is what is most important. So in a smaller state, if notwithstanding if they have the resources or they don't have the resources, if there's an equal distribution or a fair distribution, let's say, not equal distribution. Equal distribution is a bit too, I think, a bit too socialist, but a fair distribution of those resources, then states are probably in a bit of a better place. But I've seen, and I believe that governance comes in at three levels. The first and the more primitive, say primitive, it's not wrong, but it's more probably less developed, is the code or prescriptive-based type governance, which we have seen when we initially developed, codes of corporate governance and stuff like that, because we needed to have a level playing field, and we needed to have equity and equality between people and businesses, so that they could thrive, but not thrive at the expense of one another. But then later on, we started developing more mature systems, which are more performance-based kind of governance, and one where accountability and understanding, where the maturity has grown, to give greater accountability for those who are running the business to perform, and not only perform from a financial performance point of view, but from a non-financial, for example, on the environment, social, and governance performance and stuff like that. But really, ultimately, what we should see in the future to have is a more principle-based type governance system, where we're really driven by underpinning principles around this. And I think it's going to become more and more important in the future, because the world is changing really, really fast. And I think it's very, very difficult for corporate governance standards, especially if they're prescriptive, to keep up with all these changes which are happening. If it's in the environment, if it's in the social realm, or digitization, technology, and so on and so forth. So really, what we want to move from is more a kind of transactional type ESG performance drive towards a more transformational. The problem that we've had is that when we started, even with voluntary or even with required reporting of ESG, what we found is, I think that the ESG reporting, even when it was voluntary for a lot of organizations who try to basically get on this train, is that it actually regressed them back to a more transactional type kind of governance. And I think that so really understanding ESG performance is what can drive an organization towards a transformational model, where they can transform with the times, especially with all these changes which are happening. So there needs to be, obviously, a balance generally overall between ESG and financial value. This year, only the last few days, the highest two records of heat in places like, I think in Moscow, they they've hit about 32 degrees centigrade, and I can't remember another place in the world also. The temperature has gone up. Here in Dubai, about a week ago, we reached what they call a wet bulb temperature. Wet bulb temperature is one which refers to when there's so much humidity that it's so hot that you can't sweat anymore. And it reached wet bulb temperature around, I think maybe recorded about 11:30 in the morning of around 62 degrees centigrade. So that's the feel effect. The actual temperature was only around about 52, but that's quite serious anyway, you know. So you know, the climate change issues and the issues, and we don't have time to get into the technical issues of what kind of problems, you know, organizations are going to face and having to deal with this, and places which are relatively not prepared for this kind of heat. It becomes a real problem. We had here in Dubai, you'd have known that we had some floods a few months ago, and they were really, really crippling. I mean, I've never seen it hit this country that badly. I mean, it was you know, the cars were like abandoned because many of them drowned and stuff like that. So it was like driving through a war zone. You know, it was very very difficult to see. But that was because of heavy rain. We had rain equivalent of the rainfall, I think, for 7-8 months in the UK. Sort of hit us in about 24 hours. We had about more than 240 millimeters of rain in a matter of 24 hours. So, you know, climate change, I don't think it's affecting only one part of the world or certain parts of the world. It's affecting the whole world. I think you know, businesses really need to understand. I mean, even if they don't want to, or they feel that they cannot do something about it, they must recognize that it's really there, and it's really, really very serious, and it's going to impact their businesses, they like it or not. Now they can either try to do something about it and be proactive, or they can just sit there and hope, you know, hope for the best and maybe try to plan for the worst. But I think I want to just go back and say, so what is driving a lot of this? I've always had this issue with trying to understand how we've been trying to drive ESG, environment, sustainability. I mean, as Camilla said, you know, my background actually is an environmental engineer, and I you know, always found that there was always this debate around, you know, okay, how much do we need to protect the environment, and how much is right to protect the environment, stuff like that. And I think a lot of leaders in organizations probably recognize, because it's sort of touching their lives, about environmental stuff. And the gentleman, Bob Arnold, who I wrote a book with on governance and leadership in HSE a few years ago, used to always tell me, you know, I've worked with many directors, you know, and one thing I can tell you for sure is that a lot of them, they really want to do the right thing. You know, they want to do good things, but they want to do the right thing. Problem is that they just don't know how to do it, and this is where I think one of our key weaknesses in a lot of boards around the world, and I think it doesn't apply only to this part of the world, it applies to so many parts of the world. And I've worked with directors and even trained with directors, for example, in the UK with IOD, and I've trained here with the Board Directors Institute and Hawkama. And it's the same thing. I think the competence of directors in terms of really understanding this whole aspect of what role do they play and what can they do. And as I said, you know, so this is short-termism, which is is enshrined really in the basic mechanism of how businesses work, and the quarter to quarter and the year to year kind of drive, and then the drivers around this were, you know, paying bonuses to directors and non-executives and executives for the performance of companies, and generally related to obviously financial performance rather than ESG performance. I mean, it's very good. You know, you can get some nice plaques and nice certificates and nice, you know, pictures with some important people, and you know, get a lot of recognition that way. But at the end of the day, you know, as some leaders that I've encountered in my life, I still encountered them actually. You know, they always tell me that you know, Waddah, you know, doesn't put bread on the table. Yeah. So you know, always remember that you know, you got to put bread on the table at the end of the day. And okay, it's fine, but you know, I always tell them that, you know, but I don't want to have only bread on the table today. I want my kids to also have bread on the table, and my grandkids maybe have bread on the table as well. So, so it's a question of short-termism versus long-termism. Now, there's a lot of great uncertainty ahead of us. This digitization, this issues of climate change, these issues of, well, I mean, today, you know, cybersecurity and the stability of the whole internet network, you know, cyber currencies which are coming in, you know, and all, of course, and all this political unrest, which seems to be just growing worse and worse around the world. And amazingly, I was just reflecting on the fact that, you know, I was just sitting here in Dubai and I'm talking to people who are really literally across the world from me, you know, on the other side of the earth from me. And we're having this conversation and we're learning from each other and we're, you know, talking to each other. And yet at the same time, with all this connectivity and all this ability for us to connect and as nations, and you know, that we're unable actually you know, to have that right level of dialogue and have a dialogue of civilizations, you know, probably unlike what Samuel Huntington spoke about, which is the clash of civilizations and the ultimate clash. I think that there is a great deal of collaboration and learning that we can have from each other. So this greater uncertainty, I think, puts directors at you know, at a very uh, difficult point, I think, in the near future, and they need to really sort of try to be able to deal with that level of uncertainty by having greater skills of, in my view, sense making as leaders. And I think, and I'm not talking about only about operational and executive leaders. I'm talking about also non-executive directors of organizations. They also need to have sense making, where they know what is sort of happening around the world and what could happen. So their competence and their more holistic thinking towards, you know, how the world is all connected. And there is a tight coupling between a lot of issues today. So you can see the political issues are linked to the commercial issues, are linked to logistics issues. I mean, just look at, for example, at the moment, the Red Sea crisis that we're having around in the world. It's having a very, very massive impact on many, many things, and it's all interrelated to so many different conflicts which are happening around the world. And instead of us actually being able to sit back and say, okay, well, we need to do what's best for all of us, and I'm sure that there are certain people who are, I guess, profiting from crisis and wars and stuff like that. But the majority of people are suffering. I'm sure of that. So really, I think organizations need, and directors of organizations um, need to deal with all of this sort of kind of mixed interests and many mixed interests, and manage this you know, I don't know, you know, convenience or inconvenience. I always like to refer to, like, you know, for example, joint ventures. You know, a lot of organizations today are working and collaborating, and when they collaborate, most of them work through joint ventures. And joint ventures are what is described to as probably, you know, Professor Garrett might correct me, but usually are referred to as marriages of convenience between organizations. And it's good. I think they serve their purpose. The only problem is that when they start these sort of marriages become a bit inconvenient, then, you know, organizations don't work very well together. And we see directors of joint ventures sometimes when times change, they're not aware, and that's why I'm saying that sense making is very important to see what's happening. So taking it back to ESG at the moment, some organizations around the world are more focused on ESG. And I've seen, you know, so partner organizations also who have come into JVs with each other, with some organizations actually trying to drive the ESG agenda faster than others. And this puts some directors under some very, very serious kind of level of stress. So it's important to understand that we have to really look at ESG as part of the business, and really, and not as an add-on. I still think that ESG is being treated in most parts of the world as a sort of an add-on and a compliance issue, and something that we need to do. And I think it takes us back to the very purpose of business. And do directors really understand what is the purpose of that business? And the purpose of that business, obviously, is to create value for society, create value for the economy, create value, and that value should be relatively long term. So we've obviously moved away in many parts of the world from the shareholder value maximization only, and move towards more stakeholder value. And I think many of the sustainability reports, at least that I was involved in earlier of my when sustainability reporting started coming in, was more about showing that shareholders, and recognizing the shareholders, is fine, and it's very important. I want to say something about activism. Actually, activism for me is a very, very interesting term. It's a very interesting concept, because we see activism sometimes as being considered a very, very positive thing. We think that activism is good. I think activism being a right of everybody to be an activist in their own right. I mean, sometimes the regulators themselves, are activists. We see activists as younger people or minorities or NGOs and so on and so forth. But it's not always positive when it comes to ESG reporting, because the activists sometimes are also pushing for something, and then there's a heavy drive towards so sort of the S, maybe the E, and not understanding the sort of the long term also importance of managing these things. I come from an industry which is obviously being challenged a lot at the moment, the energy industry, and I think that the idea of just transforming and moving very quickly, for example, from fossil fuels into renewables, is something that we should have done. We should have started with a few years ago, and there are many reasons why that didn't happen, and we won't go into the sort of the history and the politics of it, but at the end of the day, you've got to move in a way which is sustainable. I remember I graduated from Cardiff University, which is in Wales in the UK, and Wales was very well known for its coal and iron and steel works and stuff like that. One of the best, I think, quality coal in the world. And in the days of Margaret Thatcher in the 80s, she was very, very effective in actually getting rid of the coal industry and sort of moving towards oil and gas and sort of transforming. And effectively, a lot of the arguments behind that was for environmental reasons. And surely it was very good, because coal is not as environmentally friendly as oil and gas. Not that oil and gas is environmentally friendly as such, but it was cleaner in terms of fuel. And so that was fine, and I think she did a very effective job in the mid 80s until the 90s. I went back to university in the early 90s, and I was living with my father in the UK just for a year when I was young in the 80s, and so actually I saw what happened to society in South Wales, and today South Wales, sadly, in the UK, has got some of the highest crime rates, highest drug abuse rates, highest domestic violence rates, and there's a lot of people who have there's very, very high unemployment. There's a lot of social issues there, and the reason why is, I think, that the change was done so fast that there was not enough time to reskill them and repurpose them and get them into different types of jobs. So whilst we can focus on E and sorted out the environmental issues, they failed to really address the social issues or have a plan to sort that sort the issues of the social issues. And at the end of the day, this is, I think, one of the most important things, because I think the human being should come first. So we have to understand short-termism versus sort of long-termism, and as I said, in a world of changing and greater uncertainty as we face it. I think really directors have a really difficult job, really difficult job. And a lot of people ask me, well, what kind of training should be done, stuff like that. I think awareness should be done, but ultimately at the end of the day, I think, and I want to conclude with these points, that directors really should take an interest in understanding what the purpose of their business is and how they can affect and how ESG performance is being affected or being contributed to by their business, and then what is their role in making the business make sure, because when the business does well and does greater profitability, in boards which actually get also rewarded, for example, shares or bonuses and stuff like that, they like to think that it was their leadership that made it very profitable. So tomorrow, if an organization is doing well and is being able to grow sustainably over longer periods of time, of say 5-10 years and stuff like that, those directors should be also happy with themselves that they were able to sustainably grow and continue your business. I think just the last point I'd like to say is that I see some also hope and light coming from the end of the tunnel that we're in at the moment. And I think with the SASB and the sustainability reporting coming closer, and the IFRS now also, and I think the reports probably from 1st of January 2025 will start integrating reports, is actually, I think, going to force directors who ultimately look at financial numbers, but they're very used to looking at numbers. They're very used to focusing on numbers. So I think when you bring in ESG into a way where they can understand, in terms of numbers, I think that will be I wouldn't say a turning point, but I think it will bring about some really good changes with regards to how ESG is looked at. So I really think that the future of, and I think this is the role of institutes such as the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute or the Board Directors Institute in Dubai or other institutes around the world, is to really have some really good focused programs. And I think it's not about ESG reporting, because as I said earlier, ESG reporting and good ESG reporting is driving a transactional type attitude of directors towards this. We got the ESG, the report's been issued, everybody's happy with the report. We gave it to the lenders, they liked the report. We gave it to the stakeholders, they said, yeah, it's good. You've given a report, regardless. I'm not notwithstanding the fact if it's greenwashed or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's about really understanding ESG performance and caring about ESG performance in terms of in itself, just like we look at financial reporting. So at the end of the day, my children, I want them to do well in life, and I want them to succeed, and I want them to perform well, and I want them to also be able to earn. But if they ended up earning, and I didn't tell them how, what I would expect from them in terms of values of how they earn their money, they started earning their money in dubious ways or illegal ways or unethical ways, I wouldn't be happy, even if I saw them as millionaires. So ultimately, as directors of companies, are we really happy with our performance if we are not, earning the money and making sure that our organizations are ethical and are looking at the long-term benefits to society at large, and the environment and the climate and everything which is related to that. So I think I think I've spoken a lot. I'm sorry, maybe my talk, if it was a bit disjointed. I just sharing some ideas actually, and some concepts. I was thinking about what to talk about today, and just wanted to share some thoughts. So once again, I'm very happy to, really honored to be here with you guys today. And thank you very much for the invitation. I look forward to having the discussion. Thank you, Ms. Camille. Over to you.
Dr. Waddah Al-Hashmi, thank you so very much for that amazing expose from somebody who is clearly so knowledgeable in this field. You have touched on so many of the issues. And there are things you said that resonated with me, having been in the boardroom for many years. Directors want to do the right thing, but they don't know how to do it. That you want your kids, and by the way, congratulations on a successful negotiation with your children. There was no interruption. We heard everything clearly. So good job. And when you share that, you want that your children and your grandchildren to also have bread on the table, right? That is a common feeling throughout the world. And that the purpose of the business should be to create long-term stakeholder value, not just the present value. And I can tell you here in the Caribbean, where we are suffering greater and greater effects from climate change, the whole south coast of Jamaica just got wiped out by Hurricane Beryl. And we feel very aggrieved because we say here in the Caribbean, we have not contributed, or we have hardly contributed to these greenhouse emissions, to these, the issues, the climate change issues, but we are on the front line of suffering the consequence. Talk to Carriacou and Grenada, islands that have been decimated. So thank you for your insights. We're going to come back and talk with you about some of what you've shared. And at this point, I want to hear a voice from our Caribbean side of the world. And so I'm going to invite Ali Matalon. Ali is one of our bright young entrepreneurs. We're very proud of her. She's the founder and CEO of Corp Care, an organization committed to supporting businesses transition towards more sustainable operations and practices by leveraging ESG frameworks. And Ali, I hope you will comment on Dr. Waddah's point about ESG reporting driving more transactional behaviors. So is this kind of reporting really going to get us to where we want to go? Ali, welcome to the CCGI podium. I know you've been here before. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Camille. Thank you, Kamla, for always having me here. This feels like a very, very hard act to follow. So, thank you for that incredible introduction, Dr. Waddah. I guess to speak to your first question, Camille, around, do we think that ESG reporting is going to bring us to a place of transformation? In a lot of ways, I agree with Dr. Waddah, and, you can't really disagree with data or studies too, right? So, if the studies are showing that it's leading to more transactional behavior, that's something that we need to be super mindful of. But one of the things that I've talked about, in this space before, is I think a huge contributor to that is the fact that there has not been universality in ESG reporting requirements. And so we've been struggling to compare apples to apples, right? In terms of, even if it were to be industry-specific universal standards, right? The closest thing that we have to that is maybe SASB's industry-specific standards that companies can disclose against, and we can use that from a comparative perspective. But, as connected as we all are, as Dr. Waddah mentioned, governments and regulatory bodies are not instituting the same standards or the same requirements. We're seeing things like EU CSRD, then we're seeing the UK version of that when Brexit happened. And then we're seeing TCFD, then we're seeing that Canada, instead of taking on IFRS S1 and S2 wholeheartedly, they've released the CSSB, which is essentially the same thing as the ISSB, and it's this whole alphabet soup of acronyms. And, there's not a ton of universality around exactly what we're asking businesses to do. And I do think that if we get closer to a place of transparency and universality, we will get close to that place of transformation, which Dr. Waddah also mentioned, right? Is that if we're more transparent, we can be held more effectively accountable. And I think for me, this really comes down to, and Dr. Waddah, I'm sorry if your ears are ringing how many times I'm going to mention you in this response. But I think this really comes down to aligning sustainability reporting as closely as we can to financial reporting. So putting the sustainability data, apologies, that's my daughter, a dog, in the background, running behind the camera. She does not want to leave the AC because we've had such record heat. So she's been in my office for the last several days. But yeah, if we align the sustainability data as closely as we can to the financial data, I think that that's where we're going to find the greatest benefit. And I think that that's when we're going to hold not just boards, but also executives accountable to meeting goals that are not just profit driven, but consider the people and the planet in the bottom line considerations as well, right? And I think that IFRS as an accounting standards board has gotten as close as they can to that with the International Sustainability Standards Board, ISSB, and their standards S1 and S2. Now, the challenge with S1 and S2 is that it's very much still guidance, right? These are not super specific metrics. It tells you which standards they recommend that you adopt. But my hope is that countries will take kind of whole hog the recommendations of S1 and S2 because they very clearly demand that you outline things like an ESG governance structure, where the buck stops, right? Who is managing this? Who is collecting this data? It requires data disclosures in ways that, you know, we do pretty much exclusively for financial reporting. It makes the data auditable, which I think would be incredibly helpful. And, you know, where the CSSB in Canada differs slightly, it doesn't differ that much, right, to create significant consequence. But I think if we can get closer to some global collaboration around what we're asking, particularly publicly traded businesses to do, businesses over a particular revenue mark, over a particular number of employees to do, we would be in really good stead. You know, from a regional perspective, this is why I do this work, is that, you know, the Caribbean contributes, I believe, less than 10% to global emissions, yet we are one of, if not the most vulnerable region to climate change. We have actually experienced climate departure in a lot of the cities that we reside in. Hurricane Beryl, as you mentioned, Camille, was a great example of why, you know, we need to act now. We needed to act yesterday, but it's even more imperative that we act now. If we didn't act yesterday, you know, Beryl was the first hurricane to intensify to a Category 5 in such a short period of time. And to ravage so many islands in the way that it did in such a short period of time. So we're seeing the ramifications. We have, I would say, the majority of kids in Jamaica go to school in non-air conditioned buildings, and we're recording the hottest day on earth every day, you know, for several days in a row, right? So, you know, we're really, you know, facing a lot of challenges that are going to have tremendous impacts on our social and economic environment in ways that, you know, have been totally unprecedented. I think we will start to see things like climate refugees from the region, and that's an incredibly scary prospect. Our tourism, which is the largest industry for most of the Caribbean islands, exists along our coastlines. Those coastlines are incredibly vulnerable. We can have entire industries wiped out. You know, agriculture is another big industry for us in Jamaica. That's coffee. Very, very vulnerable to climate change, right? We might see things like an increase in the yield of sweet potato, but a significant decrease in the yield of corn as temperatures get hotter. So how can we manage for those risks, but also capitalize on those opportunities as they arise? And no one is better at capitalizing on profitable opportunities than businesses, right? So, you know, if we can get businesses to be more aware of this and understand it not exclusively as a risk, but also as an opportunity for their business, as transactional you know, for lack of a better word, icky as that feels to me. You know, if it drives change, I'm happy to push in that direction, business wise. I know I've kind of jumped around a little bit here in kind of my introduction. I know Dr. Waddah was really leading out on the thought leadership for this conversation. So I'll pass it back to you, Camille, because I know we're going to have a little bit more of an interactive conversation, but just, you know, reiterating thanks for being here. I know I'm one of the younger members of CCGI, and it's always such a privilege to speak with all of you. Camille and I were just remarking yesterday that we've never met in person, which is such a shame. Now Camille is haunted by me. I see her at every panel she leads, and then at every Pilates class that she comes to, because I go in the class before her. So it's lovely to be here. Thank you all so much.
Ali, let me tell you, you have put your finger on the button. And the reality is we're talking about your future and your children's future, the future generations. And don't worry, I have already told all my colleagues in Ghana that we as Jamaica, we're coming there as climate refugees if we don't get this fixed. So maybe Dr. Hashmi, maybe some of us can come over to you over there in Dubai as well, because this is such a real issue for us. So I think, Ali, you have touched on a lot of the things we are currently facing in the Caribbean, and you have also given us your perspective on what the standards, the ISSB, IFRS standards, S1 and S2 could potentially do. But you know our people, all we're hearing from many of them is big stoops, we never caused this problem, and to the fact that, you know, we have to earn today. So how it is that we're going to get our people on board with this. And I mean, it's an issue facing us right now, like the resilience. We can't just talk about sustainability anymore. We have to talk about resilience.
And adaptation, right? Because we
adaptation
have to as well.
We have to build our houses differently. We have to, or go back to how we used to build them. And so there are so many things that we need to ask our government, because getting back to our topic, in terms of at the national level, how are we holding our government accountable to ensure that they are taking the steps that need to be taken to ensure that we all really don't have to head down to Ghana and Dubai as climate refugees. Some of us may come to Trinidad too, Camilla, but you'll have to deal with the whole.
And then we'll finally meet in person. I'm sincerely hoping it's not under those circumstances.
No.
But
so
yeah.
This is at a perfect time to bring in somebody who has been a corporate secretary and dealt with boards for over 20 years. Mpho Kgosietsile. I am so sorry if I have just savaged your name. Could you please say it for us?
Good afternoon again. Mpho Kgosietsile. Kamla had to go through the same tutorial a few weeks ago. Mpho.
Yeah. So Mpho, my head is very tough. Allow me to introduce you, the Managing Director of Wise Leadership Limited, a corporate governance and company secretarial consultancy, which was established 12 years ago as a 100% citizens-owned company offering corporate governance and company secretarial consultancy and training services to a diverse clientele in Botswana, regionally and internationally. She is a seasoned company secretary and corporate governance practitioner with over 12 years of industry experience. And so she is a perfect person to now take us into the boardroom and how it is we can, within that context, try to have a positive impact on what is happening in this climate changing world.
Thank you very much, Camille. Quite a challenging time, I would say, for small states, but also for Botswana. And like I said earlier, really, we are just peaking momentum at this point with regards to ESG sustainability and matters and so on. So we are just picking momentum right now. I would call these now the buzzwords for Botswana, because every other day there's a workshop, there's a conference, there are trainings on these matters. But really, this is not just workshops and trainings and just for the name of it, but it's really to create awareness, to impart knowledge, and to build capacity as well, because we can no longer remain behind at all. As the previous speakers have mentioned, the effects or the impact of climate change on their countries, I could also share that climate change in Botswana has also affected us and our way of living. Originally, yes, we are a vastly desert country on the west. So most of our developments are towards the east of the country. And also the vegetation, the east, and also the north of the country as well. And most of the vegetation being, bush savanna, which gets us to be quite arid, landlocked country. But what we are experiencing now, we also experience floods. A little bit of rain can actually bring, a lot of flooding into different areas of the country. We are experiencing high temperatures. Yes, we are in a desert, but nowadays we experience like the highest that we've had this year, 41 degrees, and so on. So really, we see it fit that it's time that we look at things differently. So there's a lot that boards or directors are doing within this space generally. The being the environment, which is quite active at this point. People are looking at building or developing strategies that have to do with renewable energy initiatives, because most of our energy comes from coal. So coal, as you know, it is where most of the carbon or the emissions really come from. So there's a struggle, and there's a balance between making the money and doing things right in terms of developing renewable energy or green energy and so on. So there's that thing in terms of balancing it out, because people are saying, well, the West or the developed countries at some point been quite big on coal, and they used coal to develop, they used coal for industrialization, and we are still actually quite behind in that sense in terms of our development. Though yes, the diamonds and the are the ones which helped us to develop to where we are now. Coal is still also a major aspect of building or developing our economy as well. And coal is a major supplier of our energy, our electricity, and so on. So directors are starting to think, how do we then move away from this without really also taking the monetary value of coal mining and so on. So when Dr. Waddah talked about the fact that directors are used to the numbers, and they need to be able to translate it or interpret it into ESG impact. They need to value the ESG impact. So this is where the conversations are. We have ESG and sustainability disclosures, which are going to be a guidance which is going to be launched in August by the stock exchange. We have had workshops with different people in terms of engaging them through the process. And as I said, it's not like people don't know what to do. The most confusing thing about it is how they do it. So the how part is the one which is really holding people back. It's kind of like people are more stuck. So the guidance is coming on board on the 8th of August. So we expect at least companies in the stock exchange to pick that up. There are also conversations within even small businesses as well to pick that up. And of course, we thank God because the United Nations Global Compact just opened office a year ago. So conversations are also going on through the United Nations as well. But yes, so one is thinking, I'm not supposed to mine coal. I mean, that's a key one for us, but I need coal to grow. We are major, diamond producers, as you know. And the challenge is now diversifying from, just diamond income country to maybe tourism. And tourism is becoming a bigger part of our economy as well. And now if you're talking tourism, you have to talk about having that healthy environment as well to carry, and to turn tourism into any monetary value whatsoever. So we have to now keep on balancing all these things. And there are really some great developments. People are rethinking strategies. People are connecting ESG into their strategies. People are having conversations about how to start, measuring and collecting data so that they can now focus on proper ESG reporting. So it's at a learning stage, at a growing stage, at a discovery stage, at the same time. So that's really where we are. And really the conversations have picked up within different boards. The understanding for sure is that we cannot be left behind. We are part of a global world. We're looking at issues like becoming a more services-driven industry as well. Maybe like the UAE and so on, so that we don't depend on minerals or things that will cause us maybe to do more harm to the environment than necessary. And yeah, so that's it for Botswana at the moment.
Well, thank you for that. And again, very insightful. And one of the things that you said that I would like you to just share a bit more on is the fact that ESG guidance will be launched by your stock exchange, right? So
yes,
if you can just, because we are telling our people here about the IFRS guidance, but certainly, and before you come in, maybe I'll just ask Ali to just say, what is happening with the IFRS S1, S2, the ISSB guidance in Jamaica right now? Because certainly I don't know of it, of the stock exchange saying to our listed companies that, these are standards that we're going to expect you to comply with, albeit our stock exchange has been doing training sessions and creating awareness around the standards. But Ali, if you can tell me exactly where we are in Jamaica in that regard. And then, Mpho, I'm going to ask you to share how it is that you have evolved to where the stock exchange in Botswana is now going to enforce this.
Sure. So I would say that I think in terms of regulatory requirements or pseudo-regulatory requirements that we'll see, I expect the Bank of Jamaica, they've been talking a lot about putting in place some climate disclosure requirements for financial institutions. So I would expect those to at least be somewhat aligned to S2 specifically. Just given, the nature of how prescriptive S2 is, I would hope that they would lean on that a bit. I know that the JSE, the Jamaica Stock Exchange, does have an ESG committee on which I sit. And, certainly lots of ideas are being floated about how to incentivize companies to more effectively report, but I don't think any particular framework has been chosen or anything has been mandated, and I don't expect to see that, at least not in the short term, but hopefully maybe in the next 2 to 4 years we'll see something coming out that's a little bit more prescriptive. But right now, really just incentivizing companies to include it in their reporting. The JSE has launched a green bond initiative. But I think we really need to drive home the point about transparency from publicly traded companies.
Yes, Mpho. Thank you, Ali.
Of course.
I like the way you say my name now. You're settling in. Yes. Well, in 2019, if I'm not mistaken, the Botswana Stock Exchange developed some sort of, I'd call this one some sort of, guidance, or, to just spark conversation in terms of how companies can start, not even disclosing, but at least looking at matters that concern ESG and sustainability, just guidance. And last year, Wise Leadership, we had the opportunity to be engaged in a project by the Botswana Stock Exchange, which was also in partnership with the Global Reporting Initiative now, to develop the sustainability disclosures, benchmarking, of course, with the JSE disclosures, and other African markets, I think like Kenya and Ghana, to develop these disclosures. And obviously, with a partnership with GRI, our benchmark was also in terms of standards, GRI, but then we also looked and compared other standards as well. And of course, also just looked at the S1 and the S2 as well, in terms of the financial reporting. So what we came up with, or as a document, is the BSC Sustainability Disclosure Guidance, which is voluntary at the moment. Keyword is voluntary, not enforced yet, because it's at an infant stage where you want everybody else to at least participate without being feeling like a gun is held onto their head. But encouragement is that they take it on. If really we want to compete at a world stage, we need to take them on. So they are going to be launched on August 8th, on a ringing, or at a ringing bell ceremony of the Botswana Stock Exchange. We've had, different forums and engaging different stakeholders. They made their inputs, they expressed their fears, because everybody is thinking, okay, so this is humongous. How are we going to implement it? Where are we going to start? And so on. I think generally people don't want to, they really, if people had a choice, they wouldn't be very much involved in this ESG sustainability thing, because it's overwhelming, for everybody to take it, especially when you're starting. A good cause though, but overwhelming at the same time. So what we have already advised them is that they shouldn't look at it as, they shouldn't skip to 90% yet. Start with 10%, because this is voluntary. At least start by learning to put this into your strategy and your processes and so on, and start learning how to collect data and so on. So build up on it, every year, until you get to a place whereby you feel that you are confident and so on. So we don't know how long it will stay as voluntary, because at the same time, there is a law, I would say a law at this point, called the Financial Reporting Act, which really, talks about or covers or mandates a corporate governance regulatory authority to enforce a corporate governance code for Botswana. We are in the process of developing that one. It's called the Bula Corporate Governance Code. It's still in draft form, but because this provision is in the act itself, it's going to, the ESG and sustainability issues that come out through the code, and in terms of companies complying, somehow at some point they're going to come in as law, if you get what I mean. I mean, it's so that's those are I wouldn't say challenges, but that's the experience of the market right now. So yes, we'll be launching those disclosures on the 8th of August. Yeah.
Right. So in Jamaica, we have a principles-based corporate governance code. The stock exchange was very involved in its development, but they have not said to our listed companies that it is mandatory. It still remains voluntary, albeit in the listing rules, there is a provision that says, you know, you must have corporate governance in place. Waddah, I don't know if you have had any experience with governments looking at what is the state's responsibility in this new climate environment. So the standards that are being developed, whether voluntary or being, are made into law and enforceable, are state entities in Dubai, in the UAE, being asked to share what steps they are taking to mitigate the harm and also to prepare your nations to be more resilient. I mean, you referred to the floods earlier. I don't know if you could share with us anything that's being done at the national level.
Okay, I mean, it's a very good question. I was involved as a sort of a senior director for sustainability and operation excellence back in 2019 and set up actually the sustainability function in 2015. It was very interesting at the time because when we created the sustainability function, I had to sort of create that function within the company, and there was a discussion with the organizational change review committee, who kept on wanting to understand why we were setting up a sustainability function and why I wanted to remove and create a sustainability function from the HSE function. And I tried to explain to them at that time that, the world was moving and that, it wasn't part of HSE. And one of the main reasons is going back to what I said, sustainability and ESG should be something which is driven as a performance factor. You can always get better, right? So if you produce, for example, any kind of product and the emissions per whatever unit of product can be reduced, right? It's like an operational excellence kind of issue. And but with HSE, it was very compliance. I mean, it was all compliance driven. You didn't want to have lost time incidents. You didn't want to have fatalities, and you didn't have this. But how could you have a stretch target then? Because if you didn't have a fatality, I mean, you're not going to bring people back from the dead, are you? You know. So the whole idea, the whole function should have changed. The UAE government actually, when it came to the SDGs, they had quite early on actually picked up on some of the SDGs and said, okay, look, these are the SDGs that we think that we should look at. Obviously, energy, water, food security, partnerships and collaborations, and some of these SDGs. If I remember, I've not been involved in having discussions with the government for a few years now, so you must forgive me. Yeah? But the idea was that they did tell organizations, and again in a voluntary way, that they should really look at this. I suspect, I've been involved in developing a standard on governance and leadership on HSE, or occupational safety and health, and it's going to soon to become the ISO 45009. And when I was asked, when it was still the standard here in the UAE standard 5052 2022, and they said, well, should we make it a mandated standard? And I said, no, I think it should be a voluntary standard. And the reason I think why that is because you wanted organizations to sort of get their head around, and as Mpho, did I pronounce that right? Mpho mentioned, is that the drive behind this was that organizations need to sort of step up to the plate, and at the same time, it wasn't about pressuring them to do things. So the voluntary reporting nature. But it's interesting also that Ali mentions that the publicly traded companies And it's really interesting because, this concept of, because I think the market, stock market can press publicly traded companies because, you're in the market and you've got stakeholders and shareholders, hanging around in this market. The market, the stock exchanges can actually, or the regulators more correctly, can actually set those standards and says, well, you have to report to this, or you must at least aspire to reporting to this and that. But interestingly, I don't know about your part of the world, but in this part of the world, 70-80% of the companies in terms of total wealth is with state-owned enterprises and family businesses, huh?
Family
And
business.
those are the guys who are, or those are the organizations which really. So if they are, if they form that size of the market, at the same time you're just telling the state on, or you're telling the public listed companies you need to sort of comply to. So I think there should be a bit more of a. I know that the OECD have tried to drive a bit more better, reporting from state-owned enterprises by putting a standard. I'm not too familiar with the standard, but I know that the standard exists, and I read an abstract on it. But at the end of the day, I think governments generally should find a way to really convince family businesses and state-owned enterprises coming in. And it's really interesting because just because you can, you have sort of a greater control on the wealth of that organization or the people who control the wealth in that organization, I think we should treat all organizations the same. All of them should be encouraged to do voluntary reporting, right? Because when the time comes to reporting, I think all of them should be also reporting. And I think that there should be a plan. I think there should be a plan. I remember many years ago, I asked Professor Mervyn King, and I said to him, in South Africa, when I read, the King 1 and then King 2, King 3, when I was doing my doctoral research, I noticed that there was, incremental changes that happened between King 1 to King 4. And I asked him, and I said to him, but right at the beginning, Professor King, did you not see those principles coming into the King 4? And so why did you, do King 1 and then 2, 3 years later do King 2? And he said to me, well, the market needed to get used to this, and it was very difficult, and we didn't want to scare people off, and there was this balance. He said there's this balance between bringing the right kind of FDI at the same time, making sure that people got used to things. But he goes, we tried to drive that very, very fast. So in a matter of, 3-4 years, whatever, I can't remember the years between the standards, but, or the standard versions. And so it drove that kind of change. So you need to give business time, I guess, to change, but you need to give them also a long-term plan. You need to give them a vision and tell them that, look, state-owned enterprises and family businesses and publicly traded companies, we will ask for voluntary reporting, get used to it, but by whatever 2030, we'll expect people to report on this. So I just want to end with this one point. I'm cautious of time. It's very interesting. I've always wondered, I said, well, look, companies have to report financial data, and it has to be accurate, and it has to be audited, and it has to be certified or verified, right? Why? Very simple. Because most companies, practically anywhere in the world, including here in the UAE now, are taxed. There's a taxation. And therefore, you must report, and you must report properly. And if you don't report properly, then you're naughty. If you're naughty, then you get punished. So at the end of the day, if we want organizations and we want directors to take reporting of ESG as serious as they do with reporting of financial performance, then definitely it has to be an integrated report, and it has to be looked at, managed, and audited, and go through the same process because they're used to it. Directors are used to it. I don't know what Ms. Mpho probably thinks. I mean, she's a seasoned board secretary, so she would know. They're used to it. So Just give them the same system, but just tell them, listen, you have to report this, and you're responsible, and you're accountable for these numbers, and you're accountable for these performance, and you have to set proper performance targets, and you got to make sure that you're doing this right. Give them some time to get used to it and learn about it and stuff like that. But they have to take accountability for it. If a company tomorrow goes into fraud or goes into bankruptcy or liquidation or something, the board of directors are taken to task. So why, when they have an environmental disaster, are they not taken to task?
Oh, definitely. I think this is brilliant. And I think Ali and I are going to go to the Minister of Finance and say to him that Dr. Waddah Al-Hashmi has recommended that there be a higher tax rate for any company that does not have the disclosures in their annual report. But in addition to that, I think all public sector entities need to be obliged to comply. I'm not seeing any question comply because they're using our money. We can force them. We'll give the private sector time. But public sector, no, I think they need to be making their disclosures. They need to be thinking about it. And right now, they're not. I'm not seeing any question.
So could I just add one thing, Ms. Camille? The other thing is that I hear that, obviously climate change is having an impact, right? So climate change is having an impact and causing, people to go into floods and go into hurricanes and things like that. So that money can be used to effectively help, right? So you have a circular kind of economy. So you got the people who are causing or not, they're the ones who should pay for that, right? I mean, I was asked a question. I answered a very controversial question during the COP28, and I said, that we could have surplus amounts of money to help us with all our environmental and all our ESG challenges. And the person who was moderating my discussion, he asked me, well, how? I said, very simple. I said, the biggest polluting industry in the world is the arms industry. So every time a person manufactures a bomb, they should pay a certain, offsetting of that carbon. And the person who's transporting that and selling it, they should also pay a tax, which goes into that. And the person dropping that bomb as well and causing that in release of those emissions should pay. So they should offset that. And then people can, because they'll tell you war is inevitable and we have to have war and security and this and that. But that's fine. But who is paying the price? The environment is paying the price. And innocent people, are also paying the price. You know how much emissions are emitted from bombs? I mean, we talk about other industries, but the war industry, nobody's actually calculating that cost. So I think that's a good way of, So maybe you can talk to your Minister of Defense about that idea. It's a good idea.
Well, our ministers are going to get back to Ali's point that we only are 10% of the problem. We need the UAE and we need the other developed countries who are the primary emitters to tax those companies over there and then send the proceeds over to us so we can rebuild our houses. I'm seeing some commentary now on the chat. And anybody who wants to say anything, sorry, go ahead, Ali. Anybody who wants to say anything, just raise your hand. We'll acknowledge you. And Camille is my assistant acknowledger. Yes, Ali.
No, I was going to say that, yeah, sure. Our government may come back and say we're not the primary emitters. But we let in a lot of businesses who are, right? And so, if they're going to operate on our soil, then we need to tax that. I don't think that any of the ideas Dr. Waddah shared were in the least bit controversial. I think it's commonsensical. We do it with every other type of impact. We tax effectively, and thereby we incentivize good behavior. Right? It's not, this idea that everyone is going to feel good about it and therefore do it is unfortunately just, I think not the way that we have raised capitalistic businesses to be. And so, we have to respond to them in the way that we've created them, I think, in being and creating punishment that aligns with the behavior that is done.
Yeah, and you're being very real. And Philemon Romano causing all kind of crosses here now in the chat. Listen to his question. Is there a sustainable solution to disposal of things like solar panels? Going green eventually will erode the environment. Who is going to take that one?
I can just say that it's a very good question, and in haste of us trying to drive in haste of us trying to drive this renewable energy. Batteries has been a big controversial issue also, and the disposal. And not only that, the right kind of recycling method. I think the short answer is, and I'm going to answer this not from a director's perspective, or I'm going to answer it from an environmental engineer's perspective. When you create anything today, you should be able to create it. And I think the environmental impact assessment should be that when you create anything, like, for example, you create a phone or something like that, you should be able to, right from the beginning, say, okay, look, these are the components. This cover is recyclable. This is not recyclable. This needs this. This can be reprocessed. This can be extracted. And you just take the cost. When you build today any kind of facility, you have to have an abandonment cost, which is escrowed put into an escrow account where you have to pay for the cleanup in the end. So I think all products should come with this, and it's not about the money that is put aside, but it's about the thinking and the process of, okay, how are you going to recycle whatever that you're manufacturing? How is this product going to recycle? And that's happening with plastics today. Single-use plastics are getting eliminated. There is that thinking is coming in, but it's just too slow because there's been a huge drive towards. But a lot of these components can be recycled as well, I think.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. So in other words, every product should come with their disposal plan. Yeah. And what Ali is saying here now is, as we innovate, we have to consider a more circular approach. Certainly agree with that, Ali. And I just want to acknowledge the comment before from, and I have moved it too far. Dexter, again, telling us about, and I agree with you, Dexter, accountability. Also integrity, almost non-existent. We need real, authentic leaders. I don't know if I agree with you that they're almost non-existent. I know we are doing a lot in the Caribbean to hold our leaders accountable and to ensure that our leaders have integrity. And I think that's what this whole governance push is about. So we need everybody to get on board. And yes, it's a lot of work. We now need to get our leaders to that place. And that point was made earlier by Mpho, where you said that the people you're training, was it you or was it Waddah who said that the people you're training are saying that we need our leaders to now be trained because we now understand what to do at the board level, but our governments don't understand. And yes, and I hear that here in Jamaica as well. And I will tell you, we have come up with some things here, like we have a corporate governance index whereby we measure the governance behaviors of our publicly listed companies, and we rate them from AA through to fail. And we want to have now that rating system for our public sector entities. We have awards, but we now want a governance index for our public sector. Because of course we have 100 and odd of them and only 17 of them sign up for the awards. So we need to move from a voluntary to something where whether you come to us or not, we are going to give you a rating. So these are the kinds of things we are exploring here in the Caribbean. So we do agree that leaders, we need our government to do more. And here as well, our government has passed regulations whereby now how boards are comprised. You have to have a minimum of 30% female, 30% male, and that they've put in term limits, and that you can't come in and change an entire board. So if government changes, you can't throw everybody out. You have to keep 3, and so there's business continuity. So just want to ensure, assure Dexter that in the Caribbean we're trying. Are there any other questions? Anybody going to raise a hand and come on and make comments?
I see Cecile is has a comment in the chat, so we could invite her briefly, but just briefly, Camille, because you're coming quickly to the close time for this panel, so you'd be able to invite your panelists to give their closing comments. Cecile, did you want to unmute and contribute?
Okay, good morning, everyone. I joined a little late, so I missed most of what went before, but I was just making the point that when it comes to also the price of funding, that will also make a big difference in terms of when boards start to take notice, because you have to incentivize them to act. Camille made the point that, none of the boards in Jamaica are looking at the whole sustainability issue, but I know certainly I sit on the board of the Development Bank of Jamaica, and we work a lot with the multilaterals, etc., in terms of sourcing funding. And you're seeing it more and more that they are very interested to provide funding at preferential rates where they're funding initiatives that are climate friendly. And so, as you know, DBJ recently became Green Climate Fund certified and is leading a charge to bring in lots of funding to support initiatives of that type in Jamaica. So I think those types of activities will get the attention of boards, so that they now need to get themselves positioned to get the type of funding that would allow them to roll out their profit-friendly initiatives. They can no longer do it without considering the other two P's, So it's happening slowly. I like the idea of the different tax rates for those who are dealing with the sustainability issues, as you mentioned. But I should also mention that because I have a big interest in this area, I'm ESG certified, etc., I tend to look through that lens when I'm treating with my roles in various audit committees, etc. And as the accounting firm, when they present their financial statements at the end of the year and are given their notes, I always tend to ask about the new standards that are coming into play and that we should be aware of and that we're expected to comply with. And it is notable that I have yet to hear anyone talk about S1 and S2.
Okay. Thank you for that, Cecile. Thank you for that. And I mean, I agree completely with what you have said. And we need more entities to follow that path that DBJ is going down. And as you said, IDB has made it very clear a couple of years ago that their ESG department was going to now be bigger than their credit department, because there's no point them lending money to build a bridge and then the river changes its course. So yes. ESG for our lenders has become really real. I'm going to give each person, thank you for that, Cecile. I'm going to give each of you 1 minute to say your closing statement.
Ladies first.
Ladies first. Starting with the younger, or yes, I shouldn't assume.
The youngest is not me.
I guess I will close by saying that I'll be heading with Camille to the Ministry of Finance, hopefully sometime next week is some public holidays in Jamaica. And August, things kind of shut down. We'll figure it out, but we'll be going to the Ministry of Finance. And just, I was an honor serving on this panel with all of you. Thank you so much for having me. It was very enlightening for me. I learned a lot. Always great to connect with like-minded people. And I think, as much as we can push transformation through greater transparency, I'm keen to do that. And thanks so much to Kamla and CCGI for always hosting such exciting conversations. I took less than a minute because I know that we are now at 11:30 or 12:30 during that time.
Yes. My last word is yes. We are in exciting times, times of change, times of, critical thinking and deep thought into what we really need to do. First as Botswana and also as small states. And I'm looking forward to the synergies and the alliances that we can form, because definitely we can learn a lot from each other. Some of us want to diversify from diamonds to services industry. So Dr. Waddah is here. I mean, so there are so many opportunities for growth and for sharing ideas in terms of what we need to do and become more stronger, grow from our weaknesses to be more stronger and to help build our economy. So I really enjoyed this panel and the talk so far. Looking forward to the next panel. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Waddah.
It's been an honor again to have been part of this panel, and I really enjoyed the discussion. I think in the long term things are going to fix themselves as well, because this reporting standards, everything is going to go in. But I think we need to change the mentality of directors. I like the stuff that Ali spoke about converting the risks to opportunities, and we can make risks to opportunities very quickly. You start to tax something and you start giving tax alleviation, you immediately change a risk to an opportunity. There's ways that there's many ways to do it, and if there is a will, there is always a way. And I think it was maybe Socrates who said that with virtue will come wealth, or comes wealth. So at the end of the day, directors have to understand that at the end of the day, it's ESG is about virtue. I think that as I said right at the beginning of my talk, we start always in a more less mature system with prescriptive. So we have to start with prescriptive, then we move to performance-based, then we go to a principle-based driver and stuff like that. And I think organizations, we have to start with compliance. I think, but yeah, I mean, I just don't know how fast are we going to be able to reverse a lot of the climatic problems that we've had. I don't want to be negative towards the end. Let's hope for the best and plan for the worst, as they say. Thank you very much for having us on this panel. I really enjoyed it. And thanks to my colleagues on the panel, and to you, Camille, for moderating so beautifully. So thank you.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. Thank you, each and every one. And so I will now hand back to Camille, who is going to downgrade me for going over time.